Recording in progress.
Ysgrifennu Richo o Cymru yn dweud rwy'n angen i Zoom yn ei updates cyn bod hi'n gallu ymuno, ond mae ar y ffordd i fewn.
Somebody is trying to join now.
Hi, dwi yma nawr, diolch.
I am here now. Rachel has just said that she's joined. Right. This meeting is being webcast. Right. A very warm welcome to you all to the first meeting of the committee in 2023. We'll start with apologies, Anwen, please. Councillor Glyn Jones, Councillor Lees, and Mr. Dayton Thompson. Thank you. As most of you know, one of our former members died on Boxing Day after a brutal illness, namely Caerwyn Roberts, and it is my pleasure to pay tribute to him on behalf of the authority. Caerwyn was most content in his local area, born and raised in his beloved Ardudwy, where he worked hard and was well known in many fields. Caerwyn had been a member of this authority for 30 years and was the authority's chairman for 18 of those years. He was first elected in 1987 by the then Welsh Office and then by Gwynedd Council when he was elected as a member of that council in 1999. Caerwyn thought very highly of Eryri National Park and was proud to live right at the heart of the national park, and he promoted the park at every given opportunity. And it's thanks to his efforts that many important places are in their rightful place now. Caerwyn was determined to ensure that the new facilities at the summit of yr Wyddfa, Hafod Eryri, would be built. And later on, he played a crucial lead role in the negotiations which enabled the authority to buy Yr Ysgwrn. You can just imagine the initial conversation that took place between him and the late beloved Gerald Williams, while they were both sitting either side of the fire at Yr Ysgwrn, two farmers putting the worlds to rights. Caerwyn was also very active with National Parks UK and was its chairman for several years. He loved travelling to different places to research the national park and always did that with pride. He was also a valuable member of Harlech Community Council for over 40 years and was a chairman several times. When he wasn't involved in the activities of the authority, he would be busy promoting the countryside and farming, and he did so by opening up his farm, Merthyr, welcoming many visitors during the summer holidays, as well as different school groups who came to see what it was like to live and farm on a mountain farm. He would often say that he was surprised at the answers he got to some of the questions posed to the children from the towns. And the children were also surprised to see where milk actually came from, or seeing the birth of a lamb or a calf. So another of Ardudwy's stalwarts has left us, leaving a massive gap behind. But obviously the biggest loss will be felt at the family home at Ysgubor, Llandanwr, where he and his wife Bet retired a few years ago now. We send our deepest condolences to Bet, his wife, and the children, Iwan, Bryn, and Diola, and their families in their bereavement. Before I conclude, I would like to quote the following sentence, which in my opinion describes Caerwyn down to the ground. Too dear in life to be forgotten in death. May you rest in peace. Before I ask you to stand for a minute's silence, I'd like to ask the Chief Executive to say a few words. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the staff. to a member who is very dear to us. As the chair has mentioned, he served for 40 years and 18 of those as a chairman. And during that time, he gave us real stability. He worked with 3 chief executives, and we are all very grateful to him. His skills as a politician were obvious. He listened, and he earned the trust of everybody he worked with. Yr ysgol or Havadurri wouldn't have happened without him. And he had a very personal relationship with those 2 major projects. He's been acknowledged for his work, especially in agriculture. He was awarded for his work in agriculture, and he was a valuable member of Harlech Community Council. As staff, we were very grateful for his commitment to the work of the park. His encouragement, his understanding was very powerful because it raised staff morale, and he was showing a great deal of interest in their work. He would come into the office, not to see just the management team. He'd go around the staff first, then he'd come and see the management team. If there was anything that needed to be resolved, he let us know straight away. If staff felt something needed to be done to support Cairwyn's contribution to the authority. Cairwyn and myself started within months of each other, and I don't think either of us thought that he would become the chair and I would become chief executive of the park. His condition was awful, but he did still contact the authority, and even though the conversations were short, he still remembered the achievements, and the work of the park was still very close to his heart. Cairwyn wouldn't have achieved what he did without the support of his widow, Bet. So our sincere sympathies as staff to all his family. Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma. Can I please ask you now to stand for a minute's silence? Thank you.
Iawn. Iawn.
Thank you.
Ymlaen felly efo
We'll go on with today's agenda now. If I can tell you what I've been doing since the last meeting. Beginning of December, we had a meeting with Welsh Government in the headquarters, looking at the financial situation, and myself, the Vice Chair and the Chief Executive had a meeting with Sian Gwenllian last week. We've attended training here at Plas, and on Monday we had a meeting, the Chief Executive and myself, with Cymdeithas Eryri. I would like to ask the Chief Executive for the corporate report. Thank you, Chair. A little bit of update on the financial aspects. I've had a conversation with Jonathan Saunders. In addition to what we had last week, we will have an update from Meirionydd tomorrow. The budget needs to be set by the beginning of March, and if there won't be if the situation doesn't alter, we'll have to call a meeting to look at the challenge with the budget. We froze staff recruitment for a short time, but because of the pressure work, we have lifted that. Otherwise, services would be under more. Audit Wales have joined us in today's meeting and will be joining us in other meetings over the next few months. We're part of a national study to look at the governance of national parks. So they are observing how we and you are performing in meetings, and they will be interviewing some of the staff and some of the members. As we can see from the minutes, you asked for a better Sherpa service to respond to the challenge in the Wyddfa area. The tender for the next 5 years has gone out by Cyngor Gwynedd for Gwynedd, the Park and Conwy. That tender will be for 5 years, and the service, especially in the Nant Gwynant area and through to Rhydy, will be improved compared to previously. The authority has taken to get income from the car parks to support the Sherpa service. I take it that you're still happy with that. If anything different happens, I will report back. But it will be a contract for the next 5 years. Also to note that Hafod Eryri will be opening during 2023, the first time in 3 years. They will be going up on the 2nd of March to assess the condition of the building. We don't know whether there'll be any unexpected costs because it's been vacant for 3 years, and the service will be reinstated in Easter, as we understand. Okay, we'll move on. Any questions from the public? No, nothing received. Item 4. Are there any declarations of interest? Can I refer first of all to item 15 on the agenda? The Corporate Services Director. I'd like it to be noted that I'm be doing that. I'd like that to be corrected. That's the Chief Executive's item. I would like to declare an interest on item 15 and item 16 on the basis that it's involved with my job. On those same 2 items, please, Chair, from Jonathan Corley. Does anybody willing to propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of November last year now are a correct record, please? Is there a seconder? Everybody in agreement? Does anybody got any matters arising from the minutes? No. Item 7. You're taking this item, are you? Yes, I'll take this item. On page 11, on page 12 and 13 and 15, and the first item on 17, that's been completed, so those are taken off. Also on page 16, I've got an update on item 22. Now the plans are in hand for this and will be completed by next month. So the suggestion is that we take that one off as well. So the remaining items will stay. Has anybody got any questions or comments on those sheets? Are you all in agreement? Final accounts 2021-22 to receive a report by the Chief Finance Officer. Thank you. The work is still ongoing to try to complete the accounts. Up to last March, we are slightly behind, but we have made progress since last time. And Rachel is online today and will give us a verbal update, a brief one. Thank you, David. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you all. I just want to give you a brief update on the progress and why you haven't got final accounts at the moment. Unfortunately, we've been facing difficulties with the revaluations, which has been done by an external valuer. So we've asked you this year to revalue all your assets, and not enough evidence has been provided by the external valuer for the sample that we chose to test. We have been going backwards and forwards to them, and by now we have received further evidence, but there's still not quite enough detail in some of those. So we sent a number of new inquiries last week. So I'm hoping that we will start to see more progress in this respect. Unfortunately, we can't give a judgment on the accounts until we've received all the necessary information, because the figures are material to the accounts. They are large figures in the accounts. That's the only matter. The remainder of the audit has been completed. So once we've resolved these issues, we will be able to give you the judgment and the audit certificate. So I just wanted to give you a short update so that you understand the situation. But I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. If I can reiterate what Rachel has said, where this leaves us, obviously we want to get the accounts for that year before we start closing the accounts for this year. The valuer who is dealing with the work at the moment is a professional, and we have been making progress, and we are confident that we will get all the answers in the round. It's difficult to say how long that will take. I would really like if we could get these accounts to the committee meeting on the 22nd of March. There's no guarantee of that. It might go to April. I would like you as an authority to delegate powers to the Resources Committee to approve the accounts. And I'd like you to reaffirm that if the statements are ready for March, that we can complete the work at that meeting. But I can't guarantee that, just that we're ready to do that if they have been completed. And also, I'd just like to thank you, Rachel, and the team in Audit Wales for your patience with us. I think we've inherited some of these accounts, and we are doing our best, and we will try to get this completed as soon as possible. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rachel. Any questions or comments about this matter? Can I just say one other thing, please? Just to give you a little bit of context. There are still 5 or 6 audits of local authorities which haven't been signed off either. So just to give you that context, that you're not on your own in this situation without a completed set of accounts. Thank you, Rachel. Does everybody accept the verbal report and what David said? Are we all in agreement with what he said? If we can just please minute that you're all in agreement to delegate to the Resources Committee if the accounts are ready. Okay, if you could all please show if you're in agreement. Is there anybody against? June, Sarah and Brian, are you against? Item 9. Authority budget and levy on constituent authorities for 2023-24. Yes, I'll present this, Chair, if I may. First of all, it's good to be back. It's the first time I've been in PLAS since before COVID. So I was with John Pugh in Carnarvon before Christmas. So travelling a bit more now, but the first time for me to be back since I had heart surgery and everything before COVID. So it's over 3 years since I've been there. Quite emotional to be back, actually. It's about 20 years since I presented the first budget in the room next door. And this will be the last one that I'll present to you in, because my role will be finishing in June. I would like it to be better news, but as everybody's understood now, the grant situation for 23-24 is very disappointing. And there's not much choice for you in setting this budget. The budget is driven by the grant and our reserves. As I said in the working group, different to other authorities like local authorities and the councils can set their council tax in as they wish. Gwynedd is going for 5%, Conwy going to for 10% according to the latest. I've got another hat in the Fire Authority where they can decide on the levy themselves. You haven't got that discretion in the National Park Authority, which is an unfair situation, really, that the funding from the government, just on a minister's whim, and that because of all the factors, it's 1/3 of the grants to all intents and purposes. So that's the driver. So the only thing that you've got discretion over is how much of the reserves to use during the year. I'll go through the reports, and you have a statutory duty to approve the budget. Gwynedd and Conwy, the constituent authorities, and that's based on Welsh Government regulations. The budget is based on the settlements that we received unofficially back in December and confirmed in January. Inflation continues to increase, but there's been no increase in the grant for 2023-24. We submitted the revenue budget in the November meeting to you. And there are adjustments to those initial figures in Appendix 1. And we refer to the 2022-23 budget. We have put in a 4% increase for salary increases, but the staff had the flat 1,925. So that equated to 6% to the authority. We've got to factor that in as a starting point into the next budget. So there's a double whammy of inflation on the salaries, and we haven't had any positive information about the salary increase for 2023. We've put a provision of 5% in for that for now, but in the last week the unions are looking for inflation busting 10-12% pay increases, so we could be in more difficulty during the years if the pay awards are settled higher than the provision that we've put in. I'm not advocating increasing the 5% provision now. We'll have to deal with it during the year. We will have to be cognizant of the pay awards during the year and then adjust the savings targets in the future. This is a budget that's got to be a work in progress, substantially because of the current financial and economic context. As you know, the increase in energy prices, that is hitting us as well, here, especially here in Plas Tannebolch, where the energy costs for the kitchen and heating are hitting us really hard. Revaluation of properties for tax purposes, the NNDR, we are seeing that increasing over a number of years. So we'll still need to be preparing for where we'll be. The first year is fairly smooth, but we will have a slight crack at that every year then. The forestry plan, we need to use reserves, our reserves, to fund that scheme in 2023-24 until the final grant is received. Appendix 2 and 3 give you the net budget. Appendix 2 and Appendix 3 shows the covenants, the pay, the salaries. It's just a different analysis of the same figures. Appendix 4 gives you a more detailed analysis based on services, and the capital budget in part 4, which is a substantial expenditure paid for by capital grants, and you can see the details in Appendix 5. The grants we expect are 1.45 million. Use of reserves, we foresee that in 23-24 we will have a net contribution of 2.8 million from reserves and 1.2 million from Welsh Government grants have been transferred to reserves. So that's money in and out, if you like. 780,000 to meet the deficit in the revenue budget. All that means that we're looking at for you to approve the levy based on a third of the grant. That's the grant is 4.1 million. A third of that is 1.37 million, And this percentage is, those percentages are enshrined in the legislation that established the Park Authority. So we have got no discretion over that. David has done the calculations that are shown in 6.3 and 6.4. So we're requesting you to approve the budget as and the levies on Gwynedd and Conwy. The budget will change as we move forward, but as we come to a close, there might be some underspend, there might be some overspend. So that's the bottom line as we've presented it to you. Things are changing at the moment, but I'm asking you kindly to support and approve the report and the budget. Thank you, David. Before I go to the recommendations, any comments, any questions?
One brief question on 1.6. How much are we talking about here? I was going to raise a similar question myself. It's not a matter that concerns me at the moment regarding this project, but it does raise the question where we'll be in 2 to 3 years with flow of funding in the authority if we're still aiming for these big projects, if you will have spent the reserves. And so it is a factor that we will need to discuss with you as members. Do we go for those big projects? Do we need to bridge the gaps? I was going to raise it directly, but it's something that you definitely need to be aware of because it will affect the nature of the authority's work. The following report has stated that we're not intending to borrow, but it does give some headroom with reference to the LIFE scheme. We get the money back later on. But of course, at the moment, we do have enough reserves and we won't have to borrow during the coming year. But possibly in the following years after that, we may be in a pretty different situation. And it's something that we as a park have been very good at doing. And it's done a lot of good to what we do and working with partners, etc. And so it would be a pity if we lost the ability to do so. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. I'd welcome a bit of a clarification on page 26, which is in the appendices, on the line for Plas Tanyborg. I just want to understand that I've understood the figures right, that we have a net budget of 462,000 for the forthcoming year. That's the cost of Plas Tanyborg against the overall budget for the park. Does that calculation in there include the projected additional maintenance and improvement costs that are being talked about in the asset plan or not?
Yes, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. No, it doesn't include it. And the revenue for running the Plas. There are specific capital funds or just for doing so. It does include the capital elements though. Oh, I think Elwyn is talking across. He's not on mute at the moment. I can hear everything.
Sorry, I missed some of that because the interpreter was getting interference from someone else. So I didn't quite hear everything you said, Ewan.
Sorry, Brian.
We're just trying to put Elwyn on mute at the moment. He's on the phone, I think, in the background. He's now on mute.
figure that you've got there includes a capital charges of 225,000, which is not a cash cost to the authority. So I'm sure David will be able to explain better than me what exactly the capital charges, but it's a depreciation element, I think, for the assets.
Yeah, Mae'r cost rhedag.
The cost of cash net running costs is about 230,000. The capital charges, like depreciation, comes back with the capital costs and is shared over the lifetime of the asset. So there is a cost of maintaining the asset, of course.
But in the first column, which is expenses, costs and running expenses, does that include the repair costs to the roof and other things that are projected to protect the property that was suggested in the report presented to the asset group?
Na, mae hynny'n cael ei pigo fyny fel...
No, those are picked up as capital costs and charged back year on year.
Okay. I'm still, okay. All I'm wondering is whether, in fact, there are other costs there that may come against the authority that have not been accounted for on that line, bearing in mind that we know that there are additional costs to come against the building. Although we've not had the full report yet on what the total of those costs are.
I don't think those costs have been finally decided to commit to them, so they're not itemised in this budget as it stands.
Right, okay. So that could be an underestimate if some of those works are urgent and going to have to be done in this financial year.
Gywir.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, diolch. Ifor?
Okay, Brian, thank you. Ifor? Thank you, Chair. Thanks to David for his work over the years. Can I just take this opportunity to thank him? He's been an acceptable officer, shall we say. The first time I met him on the rugby pitch in Caernarfon, he's been a gentleman over the years and has undertaken his work very well. So with Life, I just wondering when that money will be coming in. It shows in the revenue budget that we're paying out. When do we actually get that in as or back? There's one payment. I don't remember what the split is. Tim may remember what the split is with the Life programme. It's something like a third comes in initially on day one, and then we get about halfway through, and then the balance when we close the scheme. John, do you remember what the split is? I do have it noted. I can circulate it to you. Yes, you are right with that. We got a payment in just before Christmas. I don't remember when the next one is due quite, but it's been split up, like you said. Okay, thanks. And as a result of that, the Dark Skies project, it shows 54,000 going out this year. What's in the budgets for the future for that? The Dark Sky work goes from one begging bowl to another, I'm afraid. We don't have any baseline budgets for that. We make bids and cooperate with landscapes across Wales in order to support that scheme. My third question, sorry to be a pain, to try and reach carbon zero levels, is there separate budgets for that? Or are we going to try to work within the budget of every section? There isn't any funding at the moment. The authority will be considering its carbon strategy for the authority, and as part of that, there will be costs being earmarked. And so at that stage, we will be able to allocate specific funds if necessary. Thank you for that. Thanks, Eva. Joe?
Just going back to what Brian said, are there any other costs that, because they're unknown and not included in this, that are going to be added at a later date, please?
I think dwi'n meddwl bod yr costa ar y plas ma'n known.
I think the costs on the plas are known unknowns, and there are known unknowns going to arise, which we can't foresee. Every effort has been made to try and note the costs, but like I said when I gave my presentation, some things change in terms of how much we're putting towards capital schemes. There may be a possibility that there may be overspend on this year's budget, which will have a knock-on on next year, but those are not known unknowns. There will be a balance or an underspend, and it's likely to be an overspend because the payment agreement has come out as 6 rather than 4, but there are some of the things that alleviate that, but we can't say exactly what the overspend will be at the end of March now, but we'll have to deal with that. There are several things like that which will arise, and we will have to deal with those as we go along. We've done our best to try and forecast the situation in the paper in front of you today. The reality is that there isn't much that you can do except to accept the budget on the basis of the grant and the percentage on top of that. There will be a requirement to give due consideration to the funding gap with reference to page 22 at 7893 under number 8 there. That's the balance figure as we saw it today. That will of course change, but it can change both ways. But that's our best estimate when we went to press with these papers. There will be amendments and additional costs, and there may be some unexpected savings as well. But you need to support this as is for today.
Diolch.
Thanks, David. Edgar. David has already mentioned this. We've said that the money comes in at the end of the project. And then I was thinking, well, can we go for big projects? Well, in my mind, the reserves that we're using now should be put back bit by bit so that we don't have to borrow. That would be my hope, because it's really important. Well, it's difficult because we're in a situation where we have a funding gap. We have to use the reserves in the year starting in April, and in the following years, it'll be very dependent upon how we can balance the budgets in the midterm. We've talked about a 2-year plan when I've had discussions with you before now. If we can bring that back to balance it out, we can see it depends how much grant we get from the government as we move on. We're not in a situation to put back the money into reserves if their government doesn't fund that. So it's totally dependent on the government, basically. Yes. Ivor, your hand is still up. Do you have a question, or is it an old hand you've got up there? You're on mute at the moment. It's more difficult on the phone to with my fingers. Anyway, so in the past, we've had a bit of slippage from Welsh Government, lastminute.com, so to speak. Has there been any mention of this year? I've put in a bid on the working group, on the day that the working group was held in Plas that day. That's why I wasn't able to be present. And the priority was to invest to save anything that we could do really to reduce the running costs. There are lots of items relating to property that have been submitted, and we're waiting to hear on that. With capital, Ivar, there is a suggestion that there is there will be capital around during the next couple of years, but not revenue. So we'll have to learn to live from year to year with capital projects. But I've told you before about my concerns about that, because as members of the authority, then as members, you are not able to prioritize what's important for Eryri. It feels as if the power is being taken away from our hands and going elsewhere. Thanks for that, Emery. Does anybody else have any comments or questions before we go to the recommendation? You can see the recommendations there to approve the Snowdonia National Park Authority revenue and capital budgets for 2023-2024 are set out in the following appendices. To approve the levies on billing authorities as set out in section 6.3 above. Will anybody propose those recommendations? Elwyn? And Ivar has seconded that. Can we have a show of hands in the usual way if you agree or disagree, please? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Okay, on to item 10. I won't be long on this one. Item 10 starts on page 31. I won't run through the first pages. They set out the capital strategy on the basis of assumptions, and the purpose of this report is to set out the aims for borrowing and how we invest. It is a bit presumptuous, of course. We look at the borrowing strategy, and under 3.2, you have said before, any borrowings should be for specific projects, that is on the basis of a sound business plan. And the authority at the beginning of the next year will be debt-free. So that is the intention. We do have reserves, and we would be silly to borrow and pay interest rates which are increasing and expensive, because it would exacerbate our revenue issues. So that isn't changing. The table under 3.3 remains unchanged once again. That sets out the authorized limits, and that's $500,000. That would have to go to the authority before borrowing the $500,000. The 100,000 operationally is where there is more flexibility for finance officers to address that. That just gives us some headroom to implement things if we need it. If there are issues with cash flows, we're not expecting that in the next year, but we've included that flexibility for the past few years now, and I don't think there's any reason to change that for this year. 3.4 looks at the other side of the coin, looking at the investment strategy crystallized in essence in paragraph 3.6, where we say that any surplus funds will be deposited with one or more of the following institutions: Bank of Scotland, HSBC, Santander, Barclays, Lloyds Nationwide, or the DMO, which is the Debt Management Office. That is the government, where it's a last resort depositor. If you remember, about 12 years or so ago, in 2008, pretty strange things were happening, and some of the banks weren't safe. So we're keeping that DMO in place as a place to go if all of the banks start to look dodgy. But I don't foresee that happening either. But at the moment, the monies have been shared equally between 4 or 5 of those. And so we were going to continue with the same list as last year, no change in that. And with those few words, I'll take you to the recommendations. And on page 38 of your document bundle, ask you to note that there is no intention to borrow monies, but the limitations below are recommended just in case of an emergency. And 9.2 there, that the authorized borrowing limit of £500,000 and an operational boundary of 100,000. 9.3, that's been outlined there. A mistake needs to be rectified there. 9.4, reference there to adopting the investment strategy as outlined in paragraphs 3.6 rather than 3.7. We've removed paragraphs, and so we've amended that paragraph number needs to be amended. That's all. If Anwen can just note that in a minute. So, in brief, no changes. And there isn't any need for as much discussion on this one. This is a bit technical as far as reporting goes. Before we go to the recommendations, does anybody have any questions or comments? One brief question, 3.7. I'm talking about different organizations, but it says 3.7, except other than Barclays. Well, we have our current account with them, so that's the caveat there, really. Anyone else? I'm just going to propose the recommendation. Does anybody want to second that? Thank you. We have a show of hands in the usual way that you accept all of the recommendations? Thank you. Item 11, report of the interview panel for the independent members of the Standards Committee. E1. Thank you. So I've set out the general information in relation to the Standards Committee. You have, of course, received the annual report from the Standards Committee. The first one was in the authorities AGM. Following on from that, the current chair, Mrs. Rachel Jane Davies, has resigned. She has resigned because she has accepted a new post, which means that she couldn't continue as an independent member. So in accordance with the rules, an interview panel needs to be established, and this rule states no more than 5. Sometimes we settle for 5 or 4 because 5 can be a bit heavy for an interview. In the panel, we've decided on the chair, vice chair, and myself, as well as one lay member, because the rules say that we have to have one lay member. So the recommendation, quite simply, is that the authority appoints a panel, and if you could nominate whoever you want on the panel in order to interview with the prospective independent member onto the Standards Committee. We've advertised and so we will be interviewing. So we'll be moving forward on that quite soon. We have been in touch with the lay member who could be a part of, fill that role, and is agreed. So all we need to do now is to agree the internal process. Any comments or questions before we go to the recommendation? before we go to the recommendation, do we have any nominations for the panel? If it helps, historically, we've said the chair, vice chair, and myself. But obviously, you can choose anyone else if you want. If nobody else wants to do it, I'm willing to. Okay, Tim. Can I therefore propose the chair, vice chair, and the solicitor?
Kennig.
So Elwyn has proposed the situation as is under 1.3. Can I also second that? Ivor, thank you. So where does that leave Tim? What about the lay member? We have been in touch with the lay person. They've agreed to take part in the process. Do you want Tim as well? I'm happy to help if required, but otherwise, if we could have Tim in reserve then, please. So the recommendation is that the authority appoints a panel as set out in paragraph 1.3 above for interviewing prospective independent members to the Standards Committee. So, and that we recommend that Tim is a reserve member, if that's okay. Elwyn has proposed the recommendation and Ivor has seconded it. And that includes Tim, if I've read that correctly. Can we have a show of hands in the usual way, please? If you're in favour or against, motion carried. Thank you very much. Before you move on, I've had a message from John Pugh. He has been unable to connect and he is sending his apologies for that. Somebody's in the waiting room, actually. But we don't have any control over that. Where is Gitto? You'd better have a look just in case it's John Pugh. It could be Dilwyn as well because Angela's already in. It states John in the waiting room. He's left now. Somebody's trying to connect. He's wearing his recognisable orange coat. Can you hear us, John? Can I just remind you that this is being live streamed? You're on mute, John. Yes, I can hear you now. I've been able to connect. Welcome to the meeting. We're on to item 12 now.
Gwynedd and Eryri Sustainable Visitor Economy Strategic Plan, which is being presented by the Partnerships Manager. So it's my pleasure to welcome Angela and Helen to the meeting.
Yeah, okay. Well, diolch yn fawr ac
Thank you very much. Following your recommendations in the working group 2 weeks ago, I'm here today to represent the strategic plan for the sustainable visitor economy in Gwynedd and Eryri. We produced this jointly with Gwynedd Council, and as you know, we signed the Memorandum of Understanding in November 2021 with Gwynedd Council to formalise the working structures around this. we are the only local authorities in Britain who's done this type of thing to deal with some of the concerns that we heard about through our engagement and consultation on the work on Cynllun Eryri. And Gwynedd was working on the Gwynedd plan as well. I'm hoping that you think that the strategic plan, which starts on page 44 in the papers, looks a little bit better today because it's now been designed professionally, but the content is exactly the same as you saw last time. Since I talked to you last time, we have ensured some structures with Conwy County Borough Councils who have also been part of the discussions and development of this plan and are very supportive of the vision and the aims and objectives that are noted in the plan. We will be having further discussions with Conwy on the role of Conwy Council and the structures in the future, whether they are as observers or full partner. But Conwy County Borough Council is going to be part of the steering group, as you can see in the structure in the paper. And they will also be part of the partnership that will be set up in the next steps. So I won't go through it in detail. It's exactly the same as you saw in the working group meeting. But I'm hoping that you agree that this is a major step forward with this sustainable plan and that it's innovative and exciting. And if it's adopted, we will obviously work hard as officers to launch it officially before the summer and establish the partnership and have a detailed action plan. I'd also should tell you, since I spoke to you in the working group, the plan has been approved by the Education Resources Scrutiny Committee of Gwynedd Council last week and will be going to the Cabinet meeting next Tuesday in Gwynedd. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Have you got anything you wish to add?
Just to
take this opportunity to thank Angela massively for all the work that she's done on this, on top of her day job. She's done a fantastic job. It's been a very tight time scale, but this will move us forward massively with regards to be able to start to deal with sustainable tourism in the area. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. And can I just echo what Helen has said on behalf of the authority? Before I go to the recommendation, I can see some hands up. Ivar? Thank you, Chair. Can I also thank the team who have undertaken such excellent work? It reads really well. Just one quick question. How often will this be reviewed? Just, you know, the way things changed over the lockdown period and COVID and the way it's impacted on the park. So I just wanted to know how often this plan will be reviewed. Thank you. Are you happy for me to come back in on that, Chair? The next step will be to establish the partnership, who will write up a detailed action plan that'll continue for a year. As you say, the situation is quite fluid, things arise, things change very quickly. So the action plan will be on an annual basis or reviewed annually, and obviously it's going to be flexible and hopefully we'll be able to respond to anything that arises. So hopefully we won't have another global pandemic, but the fact that we've got a wide-ranging partnership across all the sectors will put us in a really strong place to deal with anything like that. Is that okay for you? Yes, thank you, Angela. Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too would like to add my thanks to Angela and Helen. This has moved the this part of the agenda hugely forward since I've been on the park, and we're getting a much better understanding of the direction of travel. And I think it's fantastic. So thank you for that. I too have but one question, and throughout the document we talk of the impacts. And impacts can be looked at both positively and negatively. And I'm wondering whether consideration has been given. If not, I would suggest that some consideration should be thought about it, not to hold up the approval of the strategy, but in the consideration of how it is monitored. And that's in relation to some mechanism of estimating the costs of the impacts of tourism over and above what we would anticipate as a normal state. So that going forward, one can actually take a rain check in 5 years' time or 10 years' time to see whether the strategy is actually reducing, the costs of impact. So the sorts of things I'm thinking about there is the damage, obviously, to the mountains and the cost of the repair, additional litter collections, whatever it might be. But there will be things in there that some would need to be costed on a proxy basis, and some would be maybe could be got at from current accounts. And I think at some stage, some sort of baseline, so we can see whether in fact those are reducing, obviously taking account of inflation, even if numbers stay the same or go up, because that would be a much harder evidence if it can be done. And I think advice might need to be taken by the partnership going forward in terms of how the monitoring and evaluation is done around that.
Brian, pwy eisiau dod I mewn? Angela?
Thank you, Brian. Angela, do you want to come back in? Just to say thank you very much for an excellent comment, and I agree entirely. Some of those impacts are going to be measured, but as Brian mentioned, it's that hard evidence of the costs and the baseline and looking at the chain. That's a very sensible and valid comment, and I'll pass it back. Thank you. Can I just add there? Sorry, I missed the first part of Brian's question. I would think that if we do get the tourism tax, that type of work will have to be done anyway. Thank you very much. Okay, Brian. John? Thank you very much. Thank you to Angela and Helen and everybody else. One simple question. Will we have to change the planning policies for this to be operational, or do our policies okay as they are? I'm happy to come back in there, Chair. The intention is with this plan between the two authorities is that it will have an influence on the planning policies. I'm sure that John or Helen can come in to ensure this, but by working together we can share evidence which will have an influence on the review of the local development plan. Anyone else? John, do you want to confirm what John Pugh was asking? No, nothing to add. This, like any document, can have an influence on the review of the local development plan starting this year. That document will be adopted for quite a while, but this, like any other strategy, can have an influence on that. Thank you. Okay, John, happy with that? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the report. It's excellent, and there's a great foundation. Just a question which strikes me. Where are we up to with regard to the brand marketing strategy, and where does that lie in relation to this work? Is it under this strategy or a separate strategy? I'm happy to come in on that, Chair. There is a communication subgroup as part of this work, so we've been working jointly with Gwynedd Council on that. So there will be elements of what comes into this strategy, how we can work jointly with Gwynedd, and then separate to that is the work that we're developing at the moment on using Eryri and Yr-Wyddfa, and how we ensure that that fits into the way we talk about Eryri and Yr-Wyddfa, and that falls under the communication engagement strategy of that the park is developing. Has anybody else got any questions or comments before we go to the recommendation? Elwyn. I move the recommendation, Chair. Thank you. Is there a seconder? Okay. Is everybody in agreement? If you please show in the usual way. Or is there anybody against? No, I think that is carried. Thank you very much, Angela and Helen. Thank you very much. Right, item 13. The working group. The first is the one on the 16th of November and the 7th of December. These are for information. Any comments? Or do you want to take this item? Has anybody got any questions or comments on these items? No, I can't see anything. The next one is the joint. Who's leading on this one? The chair isn't a member of the authority, so he can't submit these. The local joint working group. A questionnaire regarding the workforce is to be filled in between me and the unions. That has been done and completed. And then on point 7, hybrid working, there will be an independent agency sending a survey to staff to get their opinions about hybrid working. Any questions or comments on that report? Item 14, meetings of other organisations. Any verbal reports from members who've been to other meetings as representatives of the authority? No, can't see anybody indicating to speak. Right, thank you. We'll go on to item 15. Before you go to item 15, we are recording live. If you, so I'd like to ask if you can contact GitHub. If you want to continue in part 1, we will continue with the recording. So if you could, I've declared an interest. Thank you, Iwan. You heard what Iwan said. This item is open. There is information that could identify individuals in the papers. So on that basis, we're asking for this to be closed. So we're asking the press and the public and to stop the recording. Is everybody in agreement? Propose that we do that. As everybody in agreement? We're